Right, because we just passed 3 o'clock, so we can get cracking, will we? So, Nimi, can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Thank
Yes,
you.
yes,
Okay,
fine.
great.
We should mute
Oh, hello,
ourselves.
Des. You're
Wait.
joining us. Very good. Can you hear me?
Oh, yes.
Okay, excellent.
Yeah,
Fantastic.
hold on.
All right. Okay, let me get cracking on this. You know, our series, of course, cover the post-pandemic world, and we have been talking for the last, since we started these Zoom classes. And today's post-pandemic world, we are going to be looking at the global positions that are changing as a result of this pandemic. So I'll do a little bit of a breakdown as well as we go along. And the agenda will cover this today. And let me put that down. Yeah. So essentially, I'm going to be, talking about how the position, how the world is positioned, as it were, with regard to its wealth, its resources, its sort of technology, whatever it may be. And we need to get a measure of relative strengths, if you like. And I think these graphs give us a very good picture. And what I've done is I've shown this each graph in its three forms, what the position was at the year 2000, then 10 years later, and then to now. So that gives us a bit of an idea as to how each of those countries that are on the top of the league, as it were, have been changing. And we'll go into a little bit of detail as to what sort of things we're going to be looking at. Here, of course, our very fundamental question has to do with energy. Because, I mean, whichever way we turn, energy confronts us. We are so dependent on it, and we need to make sure that we make the right type of decisions in this post-pandemic world relating to a cleaner type of energy generation. So we'll just have a look at the relative sort of positions there as well, country-wise. Well, one of the other things that we also can look at is how wealthy the countries are and what's the league in terms of their standing. So we'll look at some of those things like reserves and GDP and so on. And then what is it that makes for these wealth in the countries? And that is also, shown in terms of the relative exports and tourism that contribute towards the wealth of the country. And of course, the wastage, which is I consider to be military sort of spending. So we'll sort of look at this in a bit more detail now. Okay, so really the subject is we need to have some expectations going forward. These are the post-pandemic expectations. We've covered, a bit of the supply chains and so on in our earlier lectures. So the feeling now is that if we are going to be talking about a new era, it has to be less globalization, they're saying, which basically means, this GIT means just in time. The supply chains are so sort of well synchronized that in order for companies to not stock up on the goods, they rely on their suppliers to give them the goods when they need them. That's what is called just-in-time deliveries. So that a lot of companies don't have to big warehouses. They might have just smaller warehouses where they might keep a day's stock or whatever, 2 days. But the rest of the time, they just sort of depend on their suppliers supplying them. So we're going to move away from that type of thinking, I'm told, to something called just in case. Which basically means that we need to have some alternate supplying solutions as well. So we are going to be seeing a change in the supply chain that is so fundamental to the markets at the moment. Now, the other thing that's also going to be changing is, the business models that we have been following are also going to be changing. And how we'll just in a second, because the jobs are going to be affected. And a very sort of truth has been there for the past 1 decade or even more, 2 decades perhaps, where job losses have taken place. And those job losses have been taking place because the automation has come in. Although we'd like, and then of course the outsourcing. So a big sort of change has come about in terms of the business models that we have been pursuing, and we expect it to change. In what way is that going to be changing? We can see already we are going to be expecting something more from governments. Those people who support the idea of small government and that sort of thing, they are now sort of, taking a position that says, okay, maybe not less government, because the way that government has come to, rescue the economy and the jobs means that, government has a very big role to play. And if you take Republicans in USA or even the conservatives here, they're all for smaller governments and less taxation and so on. So we're going to be moving away from that. This social contract that we are talking about, which was the traditional relationship that we had about paying our taxation and getting to, and then the security of jobs and pensions and all that. So that is going to be, in fact, changing as well. So we are going to be facing this prospect of not a smaller government, but a larger government in the post-pandemic world.
Sorry, Shafiq. Shafiq, can you mute us all, please?
Oh yeah, sure. Sorry.
Yes, there's a lot of noise coming in.
Yeah, let me just do that. Mute phone. Okay. Yeah, they're all muted now. Okay. Hello, Banu, I see you've joined us. Yeah, Banu, can you hear us? Oh no, because your thing is muted, so you won't. Anyhow, we can't see you. Anyway, I'm glad that you joined us. Let me go back to my... So essentially, we are talking about, in the post-pandemic world, a larger government and the fact that they are going to be getting more data, personal data, at their disposal by using this test and track system means that they can do all sorts of, decision making using the big data, and of course more power to them. That's what they want. Every government wants that. They want to have a grab of the power. But then, of course, there is a big problem of maybe having abuse taking place as well. Anyhow, future looks like big government and more taxes and more provisions from the government, basically. Maybe we are heading towards a UBI, perhaps. Well, the workplace is also changing as companies realize that remote employment, you see what they've been doing, like what we are doing, like Zoom type of classes. Companies are also using Zoom for meetings and for doing their work as well. And the feeling is that you've got, that you've got the work being done from home. So companies are beginning to realize that, hey, we can get by without having these big offices here, there, everywhere. We can probably just get people to do the work from afar using the Zooms. And they are not thinking about just doing that work in a local sense, but they're going to go global. See, paradoxically, it means that they will be able to access places like India, for instance, where the costs are a bit lower and the technical know-how is quite high. They might be able to get work done through Zoom sort of. That was there anyway before because of internet and because all these big pipes that were connecting the east to the west, high-speed lines and so on. So this has now been proven to work, so they might go that way as well. So there is a danger now of maybe more job losses. One, because growth is going to be, consumption is going to be lower. Secondly, the costs are going to be higher in terms of more taxation and so on. Therefore, again, there'll be the companies searching for cheaper ways of producing, and they might go head out east again. So these are the sort of things that we can keep in mind as to what this pandemic is resulting in our lives, in our society, and in the economy. Okay, let's see now. Now, big problem, of course, is global warming. And we said in our last lecture that those countries who are going to go for green technology and green economy and who are nimble enough to be able to do that, they will be the winners in the future. The old dinosaurs who are going to be sticking with the established way of doing things and relying on fossil fuels and growing consumption and promoting greater consumption as it were in the future, these are the old bad sort of, if you like, if you like, ideas. If they're going to be brought back after in the new world, as it were, in the post-pandemic world, we are in for trouble. So that's where the big battle is lying now. The pro-established status quo pre-pandemic lobbies, the oil and the automobile lobbies and so on, fossil fuel, as opposed to the green ones, electric cars, and we've talked about Tesla and so on. And that, so that's the other lobby. So we'll have to see how governments are going to be, responding. And my feeling is the governments are going to go the easiest way possible because these big lobbies will fund the campaigns, and therefore I have little confidence in the present government to seek out greener technologies. Although last lecture we talked about how European Union with Ursula von der Leyen has come out with a huge program for greening of the economy and helping and rescuing the countries there. We'll have to see how much we can do here in UK towards the greening of our economy. So the prospects are very, very dangerous. So we need to take action because the cost, you see, of not taking an action is going to be even greater than if you were to convert to green energies. And green energies are now compatible in cost to fossil fuels anyway. Okay, here is a good picture. In the year 2000, 20 years ago, the renewable energy producers, who were they? Canada, USA, Brazil, China, Russia, Norway, Japan, and Sweden. I won't go down the whole list. UK, I think, is worth pointing out where they are. They don't seem to be here anywhere. So that's a sort of a poor sign of UK not being in that league at all. And next is 10 years later, from 2000 to 2010, what did we find? Hardly much change. China is still leading. Oh, the China has come in. Canada has gone down. So China has really, if you look at that, it was nowhere before. I can't see where the name of China is here at all in the year 2000. Oh, here it is. It was at the fourth position. And then, of course, 10 years later, it's in the leading position. So you can see the amount of immense investment it is making in the right direction. So we need to learn something from that. And then, of course, now, or until 2018, they are still very much in the lead, ahead. Twice, the lead is twice as much, in fact. There's 18 compared to the 7. So you can see the immense sort of advantage they're having already in terms of creating, energy from renewables. So that places them already in a good standing. And we are here, we are doing some bit better off, but still way behind. See? Now, energy doesn't mean just energy means everything, from gas to coal to oil to hydropower, all sorts of things. Now we need to see how electricity is going to be generated. Who are the big leaders in this game? USA has been 20 years ago, 2000, yeah, 2000. They have been very good at renewable energy, producing, 76,000 gigawatts. And of course, Japan and so on and so on and so on and so on. I will pick up China. China is down here, see, just at 3 gigawatts. So quite far behind. But just see what happens to China in 10 years after that. They shot up to this year, third level. USA is still in the lead. And then, of course, 10 years, and of course, we are not there at all in UK, which is a shame. Oh, down. We are coming in here. But then you see China has overtaken everybody, producing nearly 500,000 gigawatts. Germany is doing well. So you can see some of the strong economies have some very good advantage in using this type of energy for producing for the products that they make. And we are doing relatively better here compared to what we were 20 years ago. So that's a good sign in some way. We'll have to see in a bit more detail eventually when I talk about what are the green energy plans of UK. We'll get to know a bit more detail then. Okay, now wind energy. This is just saying wind energy provides the mechanical power through turbines and so on. We know what that is. So who are the big wind energy producing countries? Now, Germany decided to go off its nuclear program and all that. So they are doing quite well in wind energy farms and so on. This is the year 20 years ago. So Germany becomes the largest wind producer generated during the late 90s, overtaking United States. Yeah. So a small country overtaking the United States. And then, of course, you've got these little Denmark as well doing quite well. Spain, because it has so much sun. India, rising, and then, UK is there, not lost totally. Okay, 10 years later, what is the standing? United States has taken over. Germany second, Spain there, China is relatively low there, the fourth position. UK there. Now what happens 10 years later, 8 years later? China has come up. See, wherever it was. So what this indicates in all this energy area is China is investing, humongous amount of resources and getting in the lead to producing cleaner energy. That's not to say they're not responsible for a lot of pollution. They still are because they've got so much more requirements of energy. But as far as these types of energy concerned, they are sort of really investing quite a lot and making headway. So this is wind energy. Okay, hydropower. This energy is also in some ways the best because you just don't leave any pollutions or whatsoever. China was able to produce more electricity than Europe and so on. So we'll see how that shapes up there. This is hydropower. 20 years ago, 2000, Canada was very much in the lead. Next, Brazil, because they've got these rivers and all that, and they can use dams to create energy and with turbines and so on. USA was also there, and then China was down here, which is in fourth place. 10 years late, and where are we in UK? We're not there at all. We don't have any hydropower projects, I don't think. 10 years later, oh no, 18, that's 20 years later, I don't know what happened in the middle one. China has taken the lead enormously. Brazil is not there, Canada and USA. So USA is middling, and UK, of course, is not there at all. In fact, the comment here, which is interesting, it says China began generating more hydroelectricity than every other continent by 2012. Every other continent. So we're not talking about other countries, but continents even. So it's gone ahead. It made a huge step forward when it created something called the Three Gorges project, where enormous amounts of electricity was done because they made huge dams in what is called the Three Gorges sort of project. So they made substantive sort of progress in generating hydropower. Okay, now the big bad countries who have this enormous advantage are the oil producers, who basically are the ones who have been supplying all countries with this fossil fuel. Saudi Arabia being the largest reserves. Canada has quite a lot there because of its oil shan or oil tar sort of oil tar, I think it's called. It's solid type of thing. It's in mud. You just have to take the oil out of the mud. Thing. And of course, this one here, Iraq. Now it's interesting that Iraq has third largest in the year 2000. And you remember, Iraq was attacked not too long ago after that. And one of the things, of course, that led to the attack on Saddam Hussein was this thing that Iraq had enormous quantities of oil. And who better than to say whether they have it or not was Peter Cheney, who was working for Halliburton before he became, vice president. And Halliburton is the one who scouts around for oil reserves all over the world. So they knew that Iraq had the largest oil. So on some pretext or the other, they attacked Saddam Hussein, saying, okay, he's sort of killing off his people, this, that, or the other. Well, if you go by killing off people, then Congo has killed off so many people, nobody's attacking Congo. So you can see the game gets played very blatantly for snatching the resources. But then what happened in Iraq is interesting. When Bush attacked and found that he was, he managed to get rid of Saddam, the new government that came into Iraq, they laid down a condition saying that no oil concessions will be given to anybody unless the parliament approves it. Now that was a nail in the coffin for Bush, because he was thinking he might be able to get a lot of concession for the companies to go, doing drilling, this, that, or the other. So he pulled out. That's one of the main reasons why for him leaving Iraq is that the the power shifted to Parliament. The Parliament said we are not going to give any concessions to anybody unless we approve of it. So you can see the games that get played in politics and the wars that take place in the Middle East because of the oil. You know, even now, you know, the oil is in the northern Iraq. Although there are some big companies like Total and who are working in Iraq, in the northern Iraq, that's the Kurds area. Now, the Kurds are being supported for their freedom because they have said, yes, we'll allow these Western companies to come in and mine for the oil and drill for the oil. So they are doing that. But as far as Iraq parliament is concerned, it's all illegal operation going on. So sooner or later, I think these people, these oil companies will be held to account because what they're doing is illegal as far as the Iraqi parliament is concerned. And of course, Iraq is not going to give the Kurds their freedom either, you know, because nobody wants to give the minorities, you know, a country of their own. So especially if the countries, the Kurds are spread into Iran and in Turkey as well and Syria. So none of these countries are going to give the minorities a little portion of their land to say you form your own country and call it Kurdistan. So that's not going to happen. So on we go. Okay, 10 years later, who's ahead? Venezuela. Aha, that's interesting, isn't it? Now, why is poor Venezuela in lots of trouble? Because of oil. If it didn't have oil, it would be a nice, peaceful country. But because of oil, immediately then the dirty politics comes in, and the dirtiest politicians will get their hands in, trying to get their hands into the oil of the country. And you can understand what's happening in Venezuela on that sort of basis. So we have largest, yeah. Okay, so even now, you know, they're leading largest oil reserves. They have so much oil that they can't even pump out because the international companies have boycotted it. So Iran had to ship oil. Where is poor Iran? Here. It had to ship oil by tankers to Venezuela. Why? Because USA has, you know, really been nasty to Venezuela on the pretext of supporting one of the opposition leaders, because he has said, yes, I'm going to welcome you with open arms into Venezuela if you get me into power. Of course, the guy who's there, who followed Chavez, he's not letting go, and he's a socialist, so he's not. But then Venezuela is suffering the consequences. Even Europe has boycotted Venezuela under the pressure of USA. So you can see the mischief making that USA causes all over the world. Well, Saudi Arabia is one of those clients of USA because they are able to maintain their position in government as royal princesses, living absurdly, wealthily, because they've said, we'll buy all the arms that you can sell us, because the arms come from USA and UK and all the rest of Europe, and that's their safeguard. That's why they're still around. Otherwise, they would have been knocked out very quickly. Okay, who are the richest countries in the world? You know, total net worth. Now I'll show you the graph. Net worth basically means all sorts of wealth that they have in terms of reserves of, you know, money and so on. Who is that? Is it 20 years ago? It was United States, followed by Japan, and then United Kingdom, quite a wealthy country actually, 20 years ago. Still is ahead of Germany and France and Italy and ahead of China. So you can see our relative position 20 years ago was a bit better. 10 years later, we've maintained a middling role, but who's come up on top, of course, is starting to move is China, you can see. See? And France has come up. France was below US, UK, and it has come up. And, and now the position is this. Richest countries in the world, still USA, but China has really caught up, from what it was. And Japan and UK is there. We're still not too badly off, so we're still maintaining some little position in the league, the league tables there. But it's the fight between these two that is going on at the moment. Okay, who has reserves and money and so on stashed away? It's Japan. Japan has a lot of wealth, although they have a lot of debt as well. And then China is very close there, USA there, Saudi Arabia, because they believe in keeping assets in gold and so on. 10 years later, China has pulled up way ahead. See? So in terms of wealth, it's sort of astounding the world as well. So it's still way ahead. And where are we? We are down here in the middle, down below here. Okay, industrial-wise, how do we stand? Now, industrial means that you need to be able to produce stuff, both technical and food and all the other stuff that we are dependent on. USA, 20 years ago, very much in the lead. And Europe, because it's 27 countries, so they were doing quite well. Japan, of course, is well there. China, still very low there, 20 years ago. Where are we here? We're just below China there. Then 10 years later, China is starting to move up. Still, EU has moved up, beaten USA. So it does mean that the EU cooperation between the countries has significantly improved their manufacturing and industrialized ability. So working together has not been bad for EU. It has really gained a lot of advantage. Because it's a free market, free movement of people. The three things that they have is free flow of four things. Free flow of manpower, of finance, of services, and goods, with no taxation involved. And that has really caused them to go ahead. Whereas we have sort of, I think in 2010 we were still there, so we're part of that. But then I think and then of course 2018 we left. We haven't quite felt the impact as yet. China surged ahead as being one of the most industrialized, wealth-producing countries. And of course, we have come here. We are on our own, so we're a little bit low on the table. We're not one of the major players anymore. This is GDP. This is counting, the wealth of a country in terms of its gross domestic product, or what is it called, purchasing power parity. This is how much the impact of your currency is on purchasing of goods. How much can you buy with the local money? So GDP, again, 20 years ago, USA top dog, China was close behind, not close behind, very far behind. And here we are. And we are not anywhere there. 10 years later, USA is still ahead, but China is catching up very much, rapidly. United Kingdom here. And then now, 2020, China is ahead by a fairly significant amount, 24 to 18 there. That's, we're talking about trillions, India, not too far back there, but still very far behind China. There was a time, when that's 20 years ago, when everybody was talking about, whether China will make it big or whether India will make it big, and it was a question of pitting the democratic forces against the autocratic forces. And there was a lot of talk in the media how the democratic forces will win. What it turned out to be is that they didn't win. They lost very badly, and they're still struggling. Export-wise, now I'm showing you just this picture because in this new post-pandemic world, we are going to be wanting to see what is it that a country needs to do to get to where it has a good standing in the league tables. Now, this is the old economy, which is fossil fuel based, sort of free market in some way, globalized in many ways, corporate world seeking to maximize profits, and the markets trying to promote growth all the time with increased consumption. That's the old world. Now we've got to be moving on to, so we need to keep this picture in mind. Who are the countries who are ahead in the game? And I'm listing them, of course, in these graphs to show you which are the ones that are really surging ahead, even in the old ways, but undertaking some measures like renewable energy and making a difference. Okay, export-wise, yeah, this year to 2010, China rapidly catching up with USA. And then, of course, it overtakes USA now. So China is ahead on so many fronts now. And we are now seeing basically an era of US dominance coming, starting the beginning of the end, as it were. That's my feeling on this thing there. Okay, what are the other things that countries earn their money from? 20 years ago, who were making a lot of money from tourism? Now, tourism is one of those areas which is going to be dramatically affected because of the pandemic. And the countries who are very dependent on that are going to suffer a lot. And who are those countries? The countries that have been very, very sort of big in that tourism game 20 years ago were Netherlands, who's that? Sorry, France. That's France, followed by USA, followed by Spain and Italy, and then China down there and United Kingdom down here. So these are the big players as far as tourism. Now, it is these countries that are going to be severely impacted because tourism is going to be affected. Because, I mean, those people who are going to be traveling are the people who are going to need to travel, essential travel. It's a bit like a lockdown, says you can't get out of your home unless you need to go out for something urgent. That's the same thing that's going to affect the industry. People are not going to travel so easily until a vaccine comes in, and even if a vaccine comes in, these countries are going to be, quite a lot affected. This is 10 years later, still France, United States, Spain, China coming up, Italy. So these are the big tourist places. Turkey as well there. UK, I'm not sure where it is. Oh, yeah, it is just behind Turkey. UK is also pretty sort of popular, but not one of the major sort of people. Now, that's our current situation now. Who are the big tourism? Still France and Spain, United States, China, Italy, Turkey, Mexico, Germany, Thailand, and the UK there as well. So you can see that the top people are still maintaining that lead. 20 years ago, they still have their lead, except that China is making a bit more inroad. Now, all the rich countries, how do they waste their money? They waste their money on military. And who are the biggest wastage people? It's USA. They spend, enormous amounts of money for a type of dominance of the world, which is fallen out of, if you like, relevance, because it is not military power that is going to be mattering, it's the economic power. So States is still leading because it has a fairly good economic power base to it, which is being overtaken very rapidly by China. And that's why there is a big war of trade war going on between USA and China. 20 years ago, China was not really a threat, so there was no trade wars at that time. 10 years later, even 10 years later, I think China is nowhere to be seen. So it's only in the, no, here, second, still very long way, about 10%, 685 to 111. So very far behind. But from 2010 to now, it has moved quite a bit now. It's catching up. So it means that China, although it's spending money in the military, it's not as much as it USA is still continuing to spend. Saudi Arabia spends because they want to secure their survivability by buying arms from USA and from Europe. India is buying it because it's got a what I would say a threat they feel from China and from Pakistan of their own making. Actually, I don't think there is a real threat. What have we got here? This is 2010. Yeah, it's the same thing. Oh, who has the largest military in terms of people? China is the leader. So although they've got a smaller budget, they've got more sort of people in the army. India has the second largest. China has about nearly 4 million. India nearly 2.5 million. United States 1.5 million. And Pakistan nearly 1 million because they feel a big threat from India. So they need to maintain, and they've got a very good army. This is 10 years later. China has got 3 million. India has really bumped up their thing there because they're getting a little bit more aggressive in terms of their new BJP government, fundamentalist government. You see, here we are, 2016, they seem to have the largest army now because they border around a lot of countries. And a lot of countries have disputes with India over borders. And of course, you know that India has put a lockdown on Kashmir. 8 million people have been under lockdown for the past 10 months. I mean, it's a disgrace that the world is not doing anything about it. But India, because it's a big market, everybody keeps quiet and don't say anything. But India also feels a threat from China and from Pakistan. And now from the smaller countries like Nepal, because they have border disputes, and China is aiding all these smaller countries to support them in their disputes with India. So India is beefing up their sort of military. Okay, another feature that I think, how are we doing for time? I think I'll rush through that because we're running out of time here. So I won't go into so much more now. I'll just stop at this point because this is just talking a little bit more detail about what are the industrial arms, industrial sort of components that make for the industry creating wealth. So I'll stop here for the moment, and I'll stop the share, and we can go for some questions now. Okay, there we are. Does anybody have any questions that we can address in the next few minutes until our time slot gets used up? I think we can go for 10, 15, 20 minutes. So, who's going to be having a question for me or a comment, whatever? Yeah, Giselle, oh, sorry, I've got to open up the the mics for me to take the question. Okay, I've unmuted all. Okay. I think, George, you've got to unmute yourself, I think. Yeah, there you are. Okay, fire away. Yeah, Giselle, I can't hear you. I can't hear you.
She has to unmute herself. She has to unmute herself, or you haven't unmuted her.
Yeah.
Oh, can you hear me now?
From my
Yeah.
side, it's unmuted.
It's okay now. It's okay now.
Okay.
It's okay now.
If so many people are not working, and we're using more AI, and somehow a lot of people are not working, how is the government going to receive tax? What will take that place? The government is badly in need of the money from taxes.
Oh, taxation. Yeah, well,
Yeah.
one of the things that we're going to be finding is as we come out of this pandemic, taxes are going to go up because, you know, somehow the other government has got to make sure that they don't keep on adding to the debt that they have already accumulated. So taxation will go up. And as far as jobs are concerned, because the economy depends on consumption, of course, and taxation, so consumption has got to be kept going. So they can't stop the benefits immediately. So they'll have to continue with the benefits for a while. So it's going to be taking time to really become, if you like, good self-funding in terms of taxation, so that, you know, the government can only spend what it gets in taxation without having to accumulate debt. That's going to take some time, I think. So we are in for a period of low economic growth. We are in for a period of more jobless and in the process, if the government, if it's smart, they'll borrow more and invest in green energies. But if they don't, then I think we're in trouble, because if they go the fossil fuel way and succumb to the lobbies of the establishment, then I think we're going to be suffering, all of us. So I don't know whether that answers your question, Giselle, but
Well, no, I can only see a problem.
yeah.
Shafiq, I got a question.
Yeah,
Shafiq, this renewable, so-called renewable green energy, the trillions that have been invested into it is minuscule, because it has to be supported by fossil fuels. Have you seen the Moore film, The Planet of the Humans?
No, Michael Moore, you mean?
You should, Michael Moore, yeah, but it's been taken off because it really shows up. The trillions of dollars, pounds, and euros that are spent is minuscule, and it still has to be supported by fossil fuels. Now, electric cars, where do electric cars get the electric from? The national grid, which is supported by fossil fuels. It would never be able to sustain itself on its own. Fossil fuels will have to always be, at the moment, supported in the next 10 years.
The problem with the renewables that we are facing, of course, is storage. Because, you know, solar power comes in when the sun shines, wind power comes in when the wind sort of blows.
Yeah, but they're not, but they don't, they're temporary, they don't last. The sun is not always out, and wind changes its direction. And it has been proved that it has to be supported by fossil fuels.
Yeah,
it's a
well,
bit of a con.
You see, the alternates are the ones that need to be considered we are, I think, going anyway for a certain percentage of it from nuclear power, because that is a little bit cleaner as far as emissions are concerned. The second thing,
Nuclear is probably a cleaner energy. And these so-called natural oil, natural power stations are not natural.
Yeah,
natural gas is not natural.
Yeah,
it's pulled by fossil fuel that comes from wood, which comes from the forest. They cut down forests to give energy to the so-called natural gas.
Yeah, what I'm trying to say, Des, is that every country has at the moment a certain percentage coming from various sort of types of energies. What the recent sort of development has shown is that the renewable energies are now, in terms of cost, as, or if not lower than the fossil fuel cost. That barrier was there before, that the renewables were more expensive and therefore it withheld the more complete utilization. But now with the
they have to
hold on, then hold on, let me finish. The main sort of sticking point with the renewables has been the storage of power, because we can generate a lot of power, but we need to be able to store it when we need it. And that's where, in my earlier lectures, I don't think you were part of that, when we were talking about Tesla, the batteries and so on. That is making a big headway. And before long, we are going to be finding that these storage devices are going to become very, very sort of affordable and manageable and giving us some clean energy. See? So let's wait for that time. I'll be talking about it a bit more in a few days of time, when there is something called a battery day going to be happening, and I'll talk about it a bit more then. Okay? So we'll leave it at that for the moment. Anybody else? Nimi, have you got a question? You normally have a question.
Well, I've got lots of. I mean, I thought they were really interesting, the graphs you showed. So they make you think of lots of things. So the first thing that occurs to me is we're talking about power now, solar power. I can't help but think that Africa, which has the biggest resource in sun, that the world needs to utilize solar power from there. And I don't know enough about it to know whether that would be something, if dealt with properly, how much that would help all of us, as far as climate change and all the rest is concerned. So that's my first thing. I don't know whether, if it were used efficiently, to what extent it would help us all get away from fossil fuels and all the rest of it. Because I understand you can store it. You can store the energy from solar power. So that was the first thing that was I was thinking of, because I do feel it's such a big waste if we're not using the solar power that we could from countries, and Africa as a continent is primary as far as I'm concerned. And I just always think if they used it, it would help them with a lot of money. So in fact, when you were showing us the graphs, I thought, okay, the West did really well with its industrialization and so on, and progressed and did really well. Then we had the period where the Middle East should have done really well because they had all the coal and the wealth, but they didn't really. So they've got a lot of very poor and they have a lot of very rich, but they didn't sort out the whole structure. And it seems to me the next should be Africa with their natural resources to try and use fewer fossil fuels, etc. So what do you think about that?
Well, Africa is going to be very important in the future because of what you just said about resources, but also one of the important things to note as well is it has the youngest population, in all of the continents. So a lot of companies are going in there to try and utilize that young labor force. That's one thing. The other thing is that China is coming into Africa in a big way because Africa lacks infrastructure. And China is now one of the leading, I don't think there's anybody comparable to that, in terms of being able to build infrastructure at the cost that they're able to and with the expertise that they have. In fact, they have also proposed to our government that they can do the HS2 for half the cost. But of course, our government is not going to accept that because you've got a lot of Tory interests there, some linked up there somewhere. But China is also making a big sort of headway in Africa. Now, in Africa, big problem is, of course, the politics and the corruption. And although they might be able to produce enormous amounts of power, the need for it to be, exported is questionable as to how easily it can be done. You remember, I think maybe it's in one of my earlier lectures, I talked about Lake Chad and the fact that it was evaporating and then it could be linked up by having canals from the tributaries of the Zaire, the Congo River. These sort of big, enormous projects are all under consideration. And it is because of China, who doesn't ask too many questions as to how corrupt your government is, so long as that money that they spend is going to the projects that they are engaged in. Which is quite the contrary to what the World Bank conditions are. World Bank says, unless you sort of do this, that, or the other, the conditions, we're not going to give you the money. So that's one of the reasons why Africa has been held back in developing its infrastructure. But with China coming in, it's growing rapidly in developing the infrastructure. I was doing a project in Zambia, and they were already there. This was going back to the 80s. And I was doing something on the aviation sort of area there, but they had already come in to put in all sorts of roads and what have you, railways. So it's interesting that China has had a long-term connection with Africa, and I think they will continue to do so. And even in the energy business, they will provide the infrastructure and put in the necessary type of entities that will help the economy of the individual countries. So I think, there is a future for Africa, I think, so long as some infrastructure and good policies.
Well, yes, and the politics, though, it is like, I'm not very, dare I say, hopeful that the politics of the continent will be for the benefit of everyone. And as I said, I feel similarly for the Middle East, which had so much going for it, but they didn't do what they should have done, which was make life better for everyone who lives in that part of the world. And I think Africa could do it if they didn't have the political challenges.
You see, the problem with some of these developing countries is that the leadership that comes into power, they can easily be bought. And if you look at the power of the corporations and of the countries whose interests are also, involved, it's very easy to, do that. You take even India. They've got trillions of dollars worth of Indian wealth stacked away in foreign banks, looted money basically, and the same thing with Pakistan. And then if you look at some of the Arab countries, they squander their wealth on grand style living, and then they buy useless arms, which are of no good to anybody. And then there's no investment in people at all. If you look at Libya was one of the biggest, richest countries, but with a population of 10 million, and it had billions of income coming in, but no investment. What he did was he gave away money to the people, the Libyans, basically like social security type of money, but didn't develop any of the downstream industries that would have made Libya into a stronger economy. It was just exporting crude oil. That's all it was doing. So you can see the big powers that interact with these poorer countries, weaker countries, they call the shots. And that's the reason why those countries are in such a mess.
But I think they call the shots because a lot of their leaders are so corrupt, and they come in and then they never want to leave, and they stay there forever. Zimbabwe, okay, he's there forever, and he takes all the wealth, and the poor have nothing. Absolutely. And that goes on in all of it. So I find that really worrying.
Absolutely.
South Africa as well.
Yes.
If you look at Egypt, he's been there for 30 years.
Yes.
Nobody could push him out. They could have pushed him out if they needed, but he was doing the bidding, saying that if I go, then all the fundamentalist Muslims will come in. So this threat of fundamentalism is a bogey that gets created by these rulers of local countries, saying that if you get rid of us, you're going to have to deal with monster type of sectarian rulers coming in, and that's not your interest. So on the whole, it's a game that gets played, and the weaker side always loses, and that's what we see.
Yeah. Well, and I think finally the joke, as far as I'm concerned, is that all these leaders pretend to be running democracies, and we know they're not democracies. The poor people know nothing, and if you take India and Pakistan, the people who are the poor people know nothing. So if you've got a landlord, he might tell you where to vote, and you vote for that person. So really, democracy as we understand it doesn't really work because of the illiteracy.
We saw that in the case of that comparison that was being made 20 years ago between China and India, saying that China is going to sort of not really grow, but India will grow because India is a democracy, and so on and so forth. Now it has been so clearly proven that India has probably a quarter of the economy, the size of the economy of China. So China is way ahead, and it's sort of organized, and it can take decisions very quickly. Okay, we all sort of look at it from the point of view of free expression and so on for the people. But the people, the middle class, who have been uplifted from poverty, with 700, 800 million of them in the last 10, 20 years, they are much more interested in having food on the table than to be able to say, well, my leader is an evil person, whatever. True. Free. That's just a banner that is floated. That's a game. So anyhow, Banu, are you there?
Yes.
Oh, you are. You're listening to what we are saying then.
Yeah, I am.
Okay, very good. Because we can't see you at all, and I couldn't tell whether you're there or not.
I am.
Okay, very good.
I'm listening. Okay. Yeah. Interesting. I'm just trying to get my bearings into the conversation, just follow it.
Yeah, we're doing a series of lectures, at least. I'm trying to focus on the post-pandemic world and some of the issues that we need to consider as to what we are going to be facing and what to be aware of,
That's right. It's very interesting and very disappointing as well.
Well, we shouldn't lose hope, because so long as we are aware of what needs to be done, at least that's a start, you see.
Yes.
Yeah.
But one thing is, it has proved good for me in many ways. It has proved good for me in many ways, which I was not able to give time to, and I was able to give time this time.
Okay, good. You're always welcome. You come and join us at future lectures as well.
Inshallah.
Okay. At the moment, I'm still planning to continue beyond July. July the term ends, U3 ends.
Yeah.
But there is a feeling that maybe I should continue, thereafter, because under lockdown, what else can we do? Travel. Which is what I was planning to do, before the pandemic came. I said I'm going to travel a lot more, which I have time postponed. So
that was I. So were a lot of us.
Yeah, right. Right. Any more questions, George? Question?
No, I'm very pleased with what you're saying. It's quite interesting that How is Venezuela doing these days with oil? Are they still in the ascendancy?
You see, Iranian tanker had to be sent with oil to Venezuela.
Ah,
You know, it's like sending coal to Newcastle or whatever the saying goes. Yeah, it's a real disgrace what's happening down there.
Yeah.
Okay, so shall we call it a day and finish the thing? Pam, you have anything?
No, I lost sound a bit there, but I heard all the lecture and, you know, it was very good, very informative. Could you tell me what UBI stands for, please?
Yeah, Universal Basic Income.
Oh, right. Okay.
Yeah.
Lovely. Yeah.
That's the idea, that if all the robots come in and take away all the jobs,
Yeah.
they will still create the wealth,
Mm.
but the people will be sitting at home and they need to be paid, and they are going to be paid the UBI by the
All
government.
right. Okay. Thank you.
Yeah.
Relating to that, did anyone see that one of the restaurants in Holland has got 2 robotic waiters?
Yes, I saw that.
Yeah, that was wonderful. And
Yeah.
yeah, that's great for what's happening now. I was also thinking at that time, well, what's happening with the taxes, you know, that sort of thing.
Well, you know, robots are not just going to be these arms that fit components into factories. They're going to be very close to human beings, and you'll be hard pressed to know whether they are human or not. When that happens, I think we're in for a good sort of society. You know? So that's
well, apparently in Amsterdam, they have a one of these in the red light area. They have one of these brothels. Apparently, is fully robots, both men and women. And apparently, they're booked up for a year in advance. People come from all over the country, all over the world to make arrangements with these things. I mean, I think it's a very peculiar world we're living in.
Well, if you take the internet as a whole, I think 80% from what one figure I heard is used for porn, and 20% for useful stuff.
Very peculiar.
You can see the technology has its other side to it, and I wouldn't be surprised that you've got services provided by these Amsterdam ladies of all sorts with robots at work. You see, one of the things about the robots that the companies say is you don't have to pay them pensions. You have to stick to the 8-hour rule. They can keep working all the time.
They don't need to eat or drink.
Exactly.
Well, somebody mentioned to me that, you know, there's some fella that they wheel out at these meetings at 5 o'clock. Is it Whittle or somebody? You know, the fella who's the scientific advisor. Well, his eyes don't blink. If you look at his eyes, they don't blink. If he's on tonight, have a look at his eyes.
We will do.
Don't blink.
Oh, well, on that happy note, shall we say goodbye?
Okay, thank you very much.
Bye.
Goodbye. Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
God bless.
Okay, take care.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.